Hey, fellow Utahns. Ty Burrell here. I may be Oregonian by birth, but I'm all about Utah nowadays, especially when it comes to natural history and science. Did you know our Natural History Museum of Utah has the largest display of horned dinosaurs in the world? It's basically the visitor center from Jurassic Park minus the screaming. As a curious kid, some say prodigy, I've always had this dream of becoming a scientist. When I heard behind the scenes that the Natural History Museum of Utah was canceled this year, I was crushed. But after I put in a call with my pal Jason at the museum, he agreed to take us through virtually in a robot. I'm so excited to take us behind the scenes and share science with you. I'm not saying I'll come out of it having discovered the sixth dimension, but stand by. Okay, people, let's get curious. Okay, pals, today we're off to the herbarium, which is where the museum keeps many precious pressed.
You know, I think that's precious pressed plants.
That is what I said. There they are, the precious pressed plants. Nailed it. So, Jason, what's the craziest plant in here?
Well, I'd say it's the water hemlock, and here it is. This plant looks like parsley, tastes like celery, well, from those who've survived it. My team tells me that it's the most toxic plant in North America.
Wow, I'm glad I'm inside a robot right now.
Well, if you were to eat it, you'd have convulsions, you'd chew your tongue into ribbons, you'd vomit, but then you couldn't open your mouth because the jaw muscles are contracting 10 to 20 times as hard as they normally do, and then you die a horrible death.
Ribbons?
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of the plants that we can eat, like basil, oregano, peppermint, they use their chemical compounds to deter creatures in the wild from eating them. This is our mycology section.
That's scientist for mushrooms.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is a king bolete, a very popular and very delicious fungus. You can pan fry it with a little salt and butter. Man, you've got dinner.
Wow, yes, wow.
We've been surprised at how many species of fungus we've been discovering in Utah. Our mycology team is cataloging species from across the state. It's never been done before.
Amazing. That must be a huge job.
It is a huge job, and it's really important that we do it now. As the climate changes, the cool, damp conditions that fungi need are changing.
So anything we do that makes the climate hotter would directly affect the biodiversity of Utah's fungus, right?
I love the way you think. You know, you really are a scientist.
I'm a genius scientist.
I didn't say that.
But I could tell you meant it.
To explore more on herbarium collection and research, we set up a socially distanced interview with Dr. Mitchell Power. A huge thanks to Ty Burrell for helping all of us stay curious during this very unusual time. Thanks, Ty. Behind the scenes is our chance to share the wonders of the museum with all of you. And usually we're able to do that by inviting you into the museum to meet our amazing staff of scientists and explore the collections here in person. This year, of course, that's not possible. But we are psyched to have you join us for this one-of-a-kind virtual event that we're calling Behind the Scenes Reimagined. Our guest today is the curator of the museum's Garrett Herbarium, Dr. Mitchell Power. And coming up in about 15 minutes, it'll be your chance to ask Mitch the questions, whether it's about his latest research on fire ecology, the signs of climate change, or simply what it's like to be a scientist and work here in a museum. You get to call the shots, so get your questions ready. But first, I'm thrilled to be here in the museum's dry biology lab with Dr. Mitchell Power. Mitch, you're not only a botanist, but you're also a fire ecologist. Can you tell me about that?
A lot of what I do is we look for long records in soils and lake sediments that capture burnt plant materials and allows us to kind of look back in time at the level of fire on any particular landscape. And so I've been involved in this locally, working in the Uinta Mountains, working on projects on Utah Lake, working in central Utah on Fish Lake. But we're really trying to understand how much fire has there been in the past and how does that fire shape ecosystems? How does it change plant communities? And so that's kind of the crux of the fire research we do is, what are the processes and where are the fires happening the most?
And fires are really affected by the way that our climate and our environments are changing in kind of large scale. So how do you use plants to figure out how that all interacts, so the change in our environment and the change in our climate?
Yeah, so what we try to do is we aggregate lots of records together, and by taking these samples, effectively they're soil or sediment samples from places across the landscape, you get a bigger picture. And as you scale up, you start to get closer to what climate is doing to a landscape. So, temperature is a great example. So when you think about temperature, when we have temperatures come up or temperatures go down, it happens regionally. So when it's cold in Salt Lake, it's cold in Park City, and it's cold, in southern Utah. So temperatures is like an average phenomena across the landscape. And what we found is that in the past records, when we have some evidence of a change in temperature, we see an increase in fire. And now, when we think about other climate controls, which could be moisture, precipitation, it gets a little more challenging because moisture doesn't happen at the same broad scale as temperature. Moisture tends to happen, with mountains. You get an orographic effect, so you get, more moisture on one side. You have a rain shadow on the other side.
Okay.
And so you don't get a continuous moisture signal like you do with temperature. So we've had a more challenging time scaling up our fire research across, regional and comparing it to things like moisture. But with temperature, what we found, for example, one of our studies, we took close to, I think it was 800 records from all over the world, from almost every continent, and we looked at the last 20,000 years. And what we found is when we compared it to evidence of temperature change, we saw more fire globally. And the devil is in the details. And so when you drill down into some of these fire records, like what we call the tropics or extratropics, they behave a little differently than the temperate latitudes.
Sure.
Or the high latitudes. So we have to start to parse out different climate effects, like how does the intertropical convergence zone, this band of clouds that moves up and down across the equator with the changing seasons, how does that affect fire? And so you start to get more complexity as you scale up to the globe. But the main trend, which is kind of remarkable, is that we found a strong correlation with temperature. And in fact, in that study we did in, I think it was about 2009 or 10, we found a hockey stick kind of piece of evidence where with fires globally, as you come into the 20th century, you see a kind of post-fire suppression. So in the US, we had some fire suppression happening, but as climate warmed more and more, we see this exponential climb in fire. And so, it's been called the hockey stick in the temperature reconstruction world because temperature bounces around and then 20th century comes and you get this rise in temperature. We saw exactly the same thing in fire. Okay. So it was like, oh, of course, but until we looked for it, we didn't know it was there. So fire ecology came into my botany because it became very clear to me as a graduate student that natural disturbances are what ultimately influence who's growing on the landscape. And so, I started to think about the processes that allow us to go out and walk through an aspen forest. And so why is it an aspen forest and not a spruce forest? And those processes often brought me back to fire. And so what I started to learn is that different amounts of fire, different frequencies, so how often fires happen, will either open or close windows of opportunity for certain plants. And so aspen's a great example. We have such beautiful aspen forests in Utah. Most of the public has probably heard something about pando, which is this giant organism on the Fish Lake Plateau. It could be 80,000 years old. It's an aspen clone, right? And so aspen is a tree that has a relatively short lifespan. In fact, if you're walking in an old aspen forest, that is probably 80 to 100 years old. And those trees can be quite large, but they're at the end of their lifespan. And the reason is they love disturbance. They're a tree that they have this ability to sprout new stems from a root system. So we call them clones. Maybe people think of the Clone Wars, but this is aspen's way of regenerating. So you could have plant one aspen tree in your yard, wait 10 years, and you could have 100 trees, because these clones will start to propagate. The reason it does that is because it's a response to fire. So when a fire comes in and it kills what we call the aerial or the above ground part of the tree, all of these root systems are ready to send up new sprouts. And so typically when you see aspen forest, whether they're young or they're old, there's been some level of disturbance that creates them. And so this was my big realization when I was studying plants early on, is that Fire is this keystone process. It's a critical process for certain plant communities. Now, in contrast to what I like to call plants that are adapted to fire, we have plants that are sensitive to fire. So if you keep going up the Wasatch Mountains and you get above the aspens, you might get to a spruce forest. Well, spruce trees have really thin bark and they don't like fire. In fact, a fire will kill a spruce because it's very sensitive. It's sensitive to heat of fire. It has no protective layers around the outside like some of the trees that grow down here, like ponderosa pine, is thick bark and it's insulated against fire. Spruce is not. Spruce dies. So why is that? So why is it that up high spruce is vulnerable, down low something like ponderosa pine is adapted? And part of the interesting piece to that story is the frequency of fire. So fires tend to occur more often in the low elevations. So in the foothills, in the valleys, where you have grasslands and shrublands, you have fires every few years, maybe every decade. That's a natural fire cycle, we would call it. As you go to the spruce forests and the top of the mountains, fires, they don't occur there very often. They may occur there every 200 years or 300 years. And so those trees don't need to deal with the problem of fire. They need to deal with the problem of snowpack. And so think about a spruce tree and it's shaped like a cone. It's not a coincidence that cone is very effective at shedding snow. So the snow is not breaking off the limbs, and spruce trees do really well in high snow zones because they can soak up that moisture all summer long. And so what's interesting to me and with the changes we're seeing today in the world is that as temperatures increase and as snowpacks come down, we're giving a bigger opportunity for fire at the top of the mountains. And so this is the concern of fire ecologists, is that there's a real geography to fire. And fire is very different in the low elevations than in the high elevations. But as temperatures continue to rise and snow levels come down, the window for burning, what we call our fire season, is expanding. And so now it's not uncommon to have fires burning in November and starting in March. And with years of higher snowpack, until the snow melts and the soil moisture comes down and plants dry out, you can't have fires up in the high elevations. But now we're seeing these drought conditions, these higher temperatures. We're getting spruce forests that are burning earlier in the season and later in the season. And that's a little concerning as a fire ecologist. So the question I have is, as you go back in time, so I can put on my paleo botany hat and think about, well, certainly this must have happened in the past. And I'll just share with you one example that we learned from the Uinta Mountains. So we were studying fossil plant evidence in the Uintas over the last 10,000 years. And we were looking at samples through time. And in the Uintas, we had a really strong signal of a spruce forest up at high elevation, coming right down to mid-elevation. About 6,000 years ago, there were these unprecedented fires. So bigger fires than we had seen any time before that point, and bigger fires than we had seen any time after that point. So we started to look at the plant evidence. So what's happening with the plant community? The forest in the mid-elevation switched from spruce to lodgepole pine. It was like, the switch probably happened in a century. And so this switch from one type of forest ecosystem to another, it's dramatic for all of the species that live in those. Everything from the fungi to the insects to the ungulates, the elk and the deer, and it changes all of those dynamics as the habitat changes. So we did see this kind of window of how if you turn up the heat and you turn up the fire, you can change completely the plant community. And so that was pretty fascinating to see that in time. And we like to think about these events as tipping points. Where do you get to a point where a landscape or a system is going to change? And so that's where we can really use fire ecology and fire paleoecology to look back and see, well, how long did it take for spruce to work its way back into that system? And we see it did happen, but it took centuries. So it's really fascinating to take fire ecology and what we know about plants today and how sensitive they can be or how adapted they can be, and then to launch that back in time and see some of the processes that happen beyond a human generation. Because as you and we're only here for for lucky a century, so we don't get to see longer processes unfold.
So you're using your knowledge of plants to look into the past to predict the future.
Yes, and I guess I cringe at prediction because I'm so bad at it. So I hand off my data and my information to the modelers, and I let the modelers really try to work out the predictions. Predictions are very powerful if you can use data from the past and you can create a simulation or a model and try to capture the past. So we call this hindcast modeling or backward modeling. So you look at our data, look at our records, look at the plant fossils we have. Can you create a simulation? Much like it's almost like gameplay, right? You control the variables and you try to create a situation that allows those plants to be there. If you can get that right, then I would give you higher confidence in prediction of the future. And so that's a lot of the work we try to do is we work with modelers, we try to look backwards, we get the models tuned or the simulations tuned, and then we can have some reasonable assumption that we're getting some of the pieces correct as we look forward. But it's time will always tell for all of these things. So that's maybe the part that keeps us pushing harder and harder to understand the past, is that to really think about the future, many of the answers will lie in the past.
It's really interesting to hear about how your experiences over time and spatially over the world have contributed to the conclusions that you're making now, which are applicable to how we're operating into the future.
Yeah, and there's interesting debates in all of science, right? And so some of the interesting debates are really pointing towards the role of humans in all of this. And this isn't a 20th century debate. This is a debate over the last 10,000 years of how much role did humans have in landscape gardening. Were humans out there torching areas with fire and building habitats that were better for their needs or better for the wildlife they hunted or used? It's an active research area. And there's a lot of opinion and there's a lot of science being done right now that's trying to understand, what is our role? And part of that is our role in the last, several decades and maybe century has been disconnected from the landscape. And so as we think about, how do we interact with the landscape at a level that creates the best outcome for us? That's the $1 million question, I think. And I don't know if I'll ever answer it. But that's a lot of the fun I get to do with my students. And
it's fascinating because, of course, the mission of this museum is to illuminate the natural world and the place of humans in it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Hey, you're talking a lot about biodiversity and how the environment and climate shapes biodiversity. Let's talk about what we have in front of us here.
Yeah. So this is what we like to call a tree cookie, or a giant slab from a standing juniper that was killed in a fire. So when we collect these cookies, we have this very sophisticated tool called a chainsaw, and we go out and we take these slabs. So the thickness of them is pretty important. You don't want them so thin that they crack apart and fall into pieces, but you don't want them so thick you can't actually carry them. So we try to get this, thickness of a slab that you can transport back to the lab, but it also will preserve for a long time and not check or crack. And so in this particular case, this was a juniper that had a really healthy, well-nourished existence. And the way we can tell that is if you look at the individual rings, the rings are widely spaced. And they're widely spaced through most of the history of this particular species.
So that means that they had constant environmental conditions, sufficient water.
Yes. Yep. So all of the needs of the plant were met. And the things to consider are, it has to have water for growth, has to have the appropriate temperature, but it also has to be well spaced so it's not competing for light. We often forget about light, and light's one of the key area resources that is competed for. So when we see an example in like a tree ring study where the rings become very narrow, we have to start to problem solve what's causing that. And so, a narrow ring could be many things. It could be a drought year, stress for water. It could be, a towering tree next to it has grown enough to steal the light. It could be an insect attack on the tree that has weakened it. It could be a fire, has burned some of the bark and damaged the tree. So all of those are possible explanations for changes in big to small tree rings. So when we get these specimens back in the lab, we start to measure carefully the ring differences, and we look at multiple specimens from a forest area to see if there's a pattern. Because you can imagine, if you've ever seen a lightning strike, lightning tends to hit a single tree. And in many cases, when we find a dead tree, it's been hit by lightning, and that tree catches on fire and dies, but it doesn't always spread to the other trees. So you can have an event that affects one tree that doesn't affect the forest. So it's really important for us to take lots of samples and to think about trends in the ring patterns we see across the forest, and try to be open to all of these possible explanations.
Can you correlate historical records with tree rings?
Yeah, so that's kind of the first step in like a calibration. And so what we try to do is we take the most recent rings on the outside of, like in this example of this particular large tree ring, we would look just at this last 50 years or 60 years, and then we would go to the region this was northern Utah, we pulled this tree from. We go to that region, we try to find a weather station that's close to this tree. And then we would start to interrogate or study that weather data. And so, what were the summers like? Were they hot? Were they dry? What were the winters like? Was there a constant snowpack? So we look at seasons, we look at temperature, we look at moisture, and if we get a match, which you don't always get a match, but often you'll have, this gets into statistics a bit, but you're looking for a correlation. And so often you get some kind of pattern, which is, this tree really likes summer moisture. So when there's rainfall in the summer, the rings are wide. When there's no rainfall in the summer, the rings are quite narrow. And in fact, in some cases, especially in juniper, like this one, you can have summers where they just don't put on a ring. And we call that a missing ring. And so that's another reason why you can't rely on one sample. You have to look at multiple lines of evidence. You have to build this from lots of evidence, and then you can say, okay, if they're all missing a ring, and that ring is 1976, we can look at that weather station and try to build a case that, all right, this is maybe there's a moisture signal, or maybe there was an insect outbreak that year. So we try to build it with as much little pieces of evidence as possible.
I have to tell you that when I was told that we were going to be talking about cookies, I had a very different thing in my head this morning.
Yeah, we can't eat these, but the bark beetles can.
Thank you, Mitch. Coming up next, my colleague Paul Michael Maxfield will be hosting a live Q&A with Mitch. So get your questions ready, stay tuned, and we'll see you in just a moment.
Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Michael Maxfield. I'm broadcasting from the Natural History Museum of Utah's Life Gallery, and I am glad to be with you tonight. Thank you for joining us for our third of 5 nights of Behind the Scenes Reimagined. We hope you're having a great night, and we are going to do our best to keep the party going. Tonight, we're going to talk about plants and fire, which normally don't play well with each other, but tonight they are bosom buddies. I am joined by NHMU Curator of Botany and U of U Professor of Geography, Dr. Mitchell Power. For the next half hour or so, Mitch and I will be taking questions from Facebook, YouTube, and NHMU's website. Folks, if you've got questions about plants and fire, Mitch has answers. So send us your questions now. Let's get started. Mitch, thank you for joining us. How you doing tonight?
Great. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to get to talk to folks. In this year where we've kind of changed behind the scenes dramatically, this is a really exciting time where we can reach out and hopefully have some good conversations with our community.
I think so too. And just by the look of it, I can see a bunch of questions coming in. So I think we should just jump right in if you're up for it, Mitch.
Let's do it.
All right. Sally from Salt Lake has noticed a lot of sick or unhealthy looking aspens in Upper Deer Valley area and is wondering what's happening.
Oh, interesting question, Sally. And probably not just limited to the Deer Valley area. I'm sure folks all over the state have seen sick and dying aspens. And it's a really important question because of course, aspens is one of the favorite trees in Utah, right? And some of you may know about Pando, which is this giant aspen clone down near Fish Lake. And Pando is about it's close to, I think, 100 acres. So it's a huge clone. But these aspen trees are stressed. And so, what we're trying to understand is why are they stressed and what causes them to be stressed. And so, there's a few different things that happen, but the supply of water is really one of the most critical things. And so aspens, they need a lot of water, which is why they tend to grow up high in the mountains, because as we get weather systems moving in and those clouds go up in elevation, they condense and they rain. So we get more rainfall up in the high mountains where the aspen love to grow. So water stress is one problem aspens have. And some of the research that some of my colleagues in biology are doing they're looking at the stress from multiple years. So when we have dry summers and low snowpack for several years, it really is a cumulative stress on aspens. And so, likely it's cumulative stress, but there's other problems. Aspens can be infected with pathogens. They can be browsed on by lots of animals. Deer and elk will chew on their bark. So they can have other issues that might stress them. But, generally it's when they don't get enough water, it really can start to stress them out. And even though they're all connected in their root systems in these giant clones, they still are being stressed by low water. So good question, Sally, and keep the observations up.
Now, Mitch, what do you mean by pathogens? What kind of pathogens would stress an aspen tree out?
Yeah, so there's there's a range of insects and fungi, bacteria, things in the forest that are targeting different species of trees. And so we know, like for our pine trees, we have certain pine beetles that go in and attack the tree. So pathogens is a word we kind of throw out there that covers all of those things, fungus or beetles that may come in and do harm to the tree, cause elevated stress to the tree. Trees, as most of you know, they make sap when they're attacked. And so when an insect or a bark beetle, say, comes in and starts to drill into the bark, a healthy tree can flush it out with sap. But a stressed tree is more vulnerable because they have low water resources. They can't produce as much sap and flush out those bugs. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. When you get drought, you can then add in some of these insects, predators, and cause more damage to the trees.
So are the insects predating trees that are already stressed?
They are predating trees because that's what they do. I mean, they're often, what we call narrow specialists. So like for example, the aspen borer is an insect that specifically attacks aspen trees. So there's a range of insects. In fact, I think there's like 600 beetles alone that attack trees in Utah. So there's lots, and that number is probably even greater than that. But so they're all specific to the trees they want to attack, and it's only when trees become stressed for reasons like low rainfall that they can have a bigger impact and kill some of the trees back.
Yeah, and I just to piggyback off Sally's question, it's hard not to notice how many dead trees there are in the UNAs these days. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, so some of your viewers may have heard of Research Quest, which was a really fun program I got to work on with a bunch of museum staff, and we went into the Uintas and we started an investigation on what's killing the trees. Because if you take a drive down the Mirror Lake Highway, you can't help but notice the high mortality rates, just dead trees, brown trees, trees without needles. And what's going on there is there's a particular bark beetle that likes to attack these lodgepole pine trees. So as I said, there's many other species of beetles that will attack, but the lodgepole pine is the dominant tree in the Uintas, and it's been under attack since the early 2000s and probably before, and it's caused these widespread dieback events. What's interesting is they go after the mature trees. So these beetles, for different reasons, they like mature trees and they avoid the young trees. So what you'll start to notice is as these bark beetle explosions die down and the younger trees grow in, you'll get a shifting age of the forest. So a lot of the tall, majestic old trees are going to be standing dead trees now, and the young trees will grow up underneath them and start to replace this forest. So it's interesting because you can start to see what we call cohorts. So when you have a bunch of trees around the same age that dominate a forest, it's a really good indicator of a disturbance event. Something happened and probably attacked a bunch of the older trees, and then you have this young crop coming up.
So how serious is this bark beetle problem? You mentioned that it's kind of been a problem for a while now. Is there anything that we can do to help, or is this kind of just like, well, we'll just keep our fingers crossed and hope that there are pine trees still around after the beetles are done?
Yeah, it's it's been frustrating for a lot of citizens in Utah who see these forested landscapes as this incredible aesthetic, and things we can do, not too much really. So at the very small scale, some of the Forest Service personnel have gone in and they've been able to put these little packages on trees. You staple a little plastic envelope, and it's a pheromone packet, and it basically tells the beetles that, hey, there's somebody already here eating this tree, go find another tree. So it tricks them. So it's
all right.
So it's a good trick, and they go off and leave the tree alone. But we can't do that for thousands and thousands and thousands of trees. It's just impossible. So there's small things you can do to try to save a few trees. If you have some beautiful trees in your yard and you're worried, talk to your nurseries, talk to foresters, try to find out, how you might protect them. Large scale spraying programs are not really effective. So really what we have to do is you buffer the forest by growing diversity, right? So you try to create a forest that has pine trees and aspen trees and maple trees and a whole range of species. So if a pathogen comes after one, you have other trees there to take that space, which, of course, trees they compete for space, light, nutrients, water. So if you have one tree die off, the other trees around will move in. So I really would say, what we can do is promote diversity, encourage diversity. In your own yards, if you like to plant trees, don't plant all the same kind. Plant a diverse array of trees. That's really our best defense against these kinds of attacks.
All right, let's continue talking about trees. Murphy from Salt Lake City is wondering what is the oldest tree you've ever found in Utah, and were you surprised by its age?
Yeah, so it's a really important question for my work because we don't know yet what the oldest tree is. So we're working on it. And yes, we're shocked every time we make a discovery. So a couple examples, there's a tree called ponderosa pine, and ponderosa, it's one of my favorite trees. We don't have a lot of it up here in the central Wasatch. It's more common as you go to the south, Spanish Fork, and down around, the Book Cliffs, you might see a few. But the ponderosa, it's this beautifully majestic tree. And we found an old one in the Wasatch Mountains a few years ago. and we did some work on its tree rings, trying to count the age. And unfortunately, the very center of the tree had heart rot, which is not uncommon. Often old trees will start to die internally. And so we couldn't get a definitive age. But when we counted the outer rings and then extrapolated to the middle, we think this could be as much as 1,500 years old. And
wow.
Maybe even more. So that's incredible. And we're starting to see that kind of age in some junipers we're now looking at out in the deserts. We're finding some very old junipers. And then, probably the oldest one that we're currently working on is a bristlecone pine. And we found this one not too far from Duchesne. So if anyone's familiar with the I-40 corridor out towards Vernal, there's an area to the south of I-40 that's considered part of the Uintas, but it's not in the mountain range. And up in that ridge line, we found some bristlecone pines, and some of them were dead, and we don't know when they died, but they are at least 2,000 years old. So we have these dead trees on the landscape, at least a couple thousand years old. We don't know their date of death, so we're trying to figure that out. So we were shocked. I mean, anytime you find trees that are, thousands of years old, it's very humbling. For our perspective, which, is kind of a century perspective. You think of a tree, just 1,000-year-old tree, that's 10 centuries. I mean, that's incredible. It's generations and generations of humans, and this tree is just standing on the landscape, for a very long time. So lots of old trees. I would, I'd say 2,000 to 3,000 years is not going to be an uncommon number as we find more of these really old trees around the state.
Wow, do you happen to know what the oldest living plant is, or known to science at this point?
Well, there's some debate amongst scientists, but there, a few years ago in Scandinavia, there was a spruce tree uncovered, and it's one of these spruce trees that has been windblown. So it's not much of a tall standing tree. It looks more like a shrub. But I think there was radiocarbon dating done on a piece of the tree that dated about 9,000 years old. So that's a really old tree. We know, like, some of the coastal redwoods in California and the giant sequoias, they can live 2,000 or 3,000 years. Of course, the bristlecone in the White Mountains along the border of California, Nevada, those can be 4,000 to 5,000 years old. So those are incredibly old. But when you start to think about trees that reproduce through kind of vegetative states, so they clone themselves through root systems, then we can go back really far. So the aspens that I referred to earlier, called Pando by Fish Lake, we don't have a precise estimate, but the conventional wisdom is potentially 80,000 years. That aspen clone has been there in some form or another. So that's going through a glacial cycle and then moving into the kind of the warm modern climate of the Holocene. Those aspen trees, if they've been there that long, they've seen quite an amazing change of events. So it kind of depends on who you ask and how, what the criteria are, whether it has to be an upright standing tree, or if it can be a root system that continues to grow on for thousands of years. The most important thing for longevity is you have to get away from disturbance, right? So just think about the ice ages. When we have the ice ages, we have huge continental ice sheets that come down over Canada. They push into what is now the United States, and they wipe out everything on the landscape. So in high latitude glacial areas, we don't get really old, long-living trees. So unless you have refugia, places where they can hide. So it really kind of depends, where you look. So most, tree hunters, as some folks are called, they go to the mid-latitudes or southern latitudes or even tropics, where you don't have more recent disturbances, where you can find really old, long-lived trees. So it's a tough question to answer directly. but it sure is fun, discovering these really old trees on the landscape.
All right. Jennifer in Lehigh wants to know, what is the smallest and tallest plants that you know of?
So I think the smallest is this little thing called duckweed, and you might even have seen it. It's a little tiny floating plant. It's often in still water, so ponds or like stagnant streams, or even some backyard pools can develop this pondweed. And or duckweed they call it, and often because ducks will get it trapped on their feathers and transport it. So I think it has like one pistil and one stamen. Like it's a minimalist. It has very few flower parts. That's the smallest. The tallest, I would say, like in Louisiana, I think they have a pecan tree that's like some ridiculous height for a deciduous tree, like over 300 feet. The redwoods in California, they get a lot of attention, 350 to 370 feet. But there may be a champion out there in Australia. One of the eucalyptus species, they have many species, but there's a eucalyptus in Australia that I think when it was measured, it was close to 500 feet. It was 400 and something, but it had broken off. So people estimate it was over 500 feet. So, I mean, that's incredible for a tree to be 500 feet. So I would have to go with the duckweed on one end and the eucalyptus on the other.
One thing that I love about plants is just the rich diversity. There are so many different kinds of plants, big and small, but so much diversity past size. It's really incredible.
Well, and Paul Michael, one of the really cool things that I learned working in Utah is that the bigger the tree, there is absolutely no correlation with age. So, I originally thought, okay, the really big ones, let's try to figure out those trees. But in fact, what we find is, these more bonsai-looking stressed trees that seem to be these kind of juvenile, poorly growing things are actually some of the oldest on the landscape. So I have a renewed appreciation for all of these kind of dwarfed trees that we have in Utah, because they may not look like much, but when you get in and start to study the tree rings and determine their age, they're incredibly old.
Jonathan wants to know, how many plants are known to science?
Oh, well, known to science, that's kind of the key there. So it's very hard to actually propose a new species. It's a quite lengthy process. And so known to science, the number is around 390,000, I think. So, close to 400,000 plants known to science. So that means, they've been described, they've been, shared with other researchers, and the other researchers have approved this process of identifying it as a separate species. So that's kind of a lengthy process. So the real number is probably much higher than 400,000. But what's probably more concerning is that somewhere around 140,000 of those plants are threatened, and with some kind of level of near extinction. So this is the concerning part: is we have lots of plants on this planet, but we also something like 40% of those plants are in trouble one way or another. So it's worth paying attention to those numbers, just because we certainly need to protect plants. And many plants we don't know a lot about. We don't know their chemical properties, their medicinal values, their economic values. We just don't know. So it's a big number. I'd put it up there easily around 400,000, and probably more as science continues to document more and more. I guess one last thing is in the herbarium collection in the museum, what's pretty neat is we make new discoveries all the time. So there's a lot of plants that go in and they're misidentified. So they may be a different species or a new species, even though they were identified as a common species we already knew about. So much of the discovery is not in the Amazon rainforest, it's in the cabinets of museums. And that's where we need to put a lot of attention to drive that number up even higher.
Sean from Salt Lake noticed in the Ty Burrell video that the cabinets in the herbarium were filled with plant specimen, and he's wondering why we need to keep so much stuff.
Yeah, that's probably the most important thing that I do for my job is to keep these records, because what these records do is they let us know and they let people in the future know which plants were growing where on the landscape. And so what it really means is we have this documentation of plant diversity. And it's the only place where you have a definitive representation of a plant in a particular place at a particular time. And you can take photographs, you can have journals and pictures and notes about plants, but until you actually collect the specimen, you don't have proof. So we at the museum, we love to talk about evidence. What's your evidence? And so basically our plant library, which is what a herbarium is evidence of all of the different plants that have grown in Utah and other places over time. And when I say over time, it's about, I think our earliest collections are in the 1880s, late 1870s. So, almost 150 years of collections. So I like to use the term biodiversity. We basically have a record of plant biodiversity from the Intermountain West, so across the West where our plants have been collected. So it's so valuable that we have that, because otherwise, as you change landscapes, you build cities, you bring in your new plants, you wouldn't know what we had and what's changed, what's been lost if we didn't have all this documentation. So it's a really important thing for us to continue to capture plant specimens.
Billy from Facebook was hoping you could describe a day in the life of a botanist.
Yes. Well, is this pre-pandemic or post-pandemic?
Let's say a normal day, like without a pandemic at all.
Sure,
what was
sure.
life like?
Sure. Well, a lot of what we do is logistics to prepare for field work. We love to dream up trips where we can go and find plants that maybe we haven't collected in 100 years. Or we have one reference for this plant in our collection, and we want to go see if there's still plants growing in a certain area. Or we have a research question, we want to answer a question. So a lot of the time we come up with ideas about, okay, here's a question. How do we get there? How do we get some answers? So we start thinking about, okay, we need permits, right? So we need to talk to agencies to get permissions to go to places and collect. We need to think about, well, what's our target? How are we going to get there? I do everything from horse backpack trips into Yellowstone National Park for collecting, to helicopter rides, to put a backpack on and walk as far as you can. So we have different modes of travel to get into places. So a lot of the logistics time is how are we going to get there? How are we going to get the specimens back, especially if it's international work. I have projects in Ethiopia and projects in Colombia right now, and so a lot of our logistics and day-to-day is thinking about who's going to help us there with permits and shipping and getting our stuff back so we can study it. But an even bigger part of my time than that really fun stuff is reviewing some of the papers my students are working on. I do a lot of editorial work. I'm constantly asked to look at other proposals where people are proposing to do some research on something. They ask me as a scientist, can I review it and talk about critiques? I also spend lots of my time with my students, which really is my favorite thing to do, because the students, the undergraduates, the graduates, and even the volunteers at the museum, they bring so much energy and so many great ideas that, I think the best part of what my day-to-day is getting to listen to their ideas, work with them, help them kind of fulfill their dreams of a particular study or adventure they want to go on, and make it happen. So it's mixed. I love to spend time thinking about the plan, like where's the next trip and where are we going to collect, and but in reality, a lot of it is we've got to do the analysis. We've got to get on the microscopes. We have to identify. Sometimes it's just parts of plants. Sometimes it's just the pollen that we're looking at from old layers of dirt. We're just looking for fossil fragments. So a lot of it's like research intensive, and then writing, analyzing, and trying to share and communicate. So it's, it kind of depends on where I am in the year in terms of, if it's field season coming up, I'm much more in the planning phase. If it's winter, the lab is more active with students at the microscopes, and I'm chained to my computer doing lots of editing. So pretty fun and diverse most of the time.
Well, I think everybody at home knows how scandalous botanists can be. So thank you for leaving out all those sordid details.
No, I didn't leave too many out.
Okay. Noah from Moab was wondering if you've ever discovered a new plant species.
Oh, well, I personally have not, at least not that I'm aware of. But one of our really dear colleagues at the museum, Ann Kelsey, she was collection manager with me for many years before she passed away. But Ann was a very astute botanist, and she worked with a close friend, Beth Corbin. And Beth and Ann had worked together on a pea plant. It's in the pea family. It's a astragalus is the genus we call it. And when Ann kind of suddenly passed away, Beth finished up this project on this plant and gave it a new name, Astragalus kelseyana, which was Ann's last name. So that was pretty recently that Beth discovered this new pea plant, which is actually not far from the museum. It's right up in Farmington Canyon. So there's new plants out there on the landscape to be discovered. It just takes a lot of time and energy, and you have to really understand the particular family and genus that you work in. So, if I were to, think I had a new discovery, I would take that plant to the experts that work only in that family or that genus and have them help me look at the characters. Now we use genetics to offer some differentiation between species. So, you really have to dig in to make those discoveries. It's tricky business, but they're out there, which is exciting. So, hopefully I'll get one myself and name it after, some of my famous students. That would be fantastic.
Okay, get ready because things are about to get hot, because I'm going to ask you some fire-related questions. Okay. Joseph from Sugar House was curious if we should fight fires or let them burn.
Yeah, well, I have a sticker on my office door which says let them burn, but there's a problem with that. And the problem is, for nearly 100 years, our Forest Service agencies and Park Service agencies and Bureau of Land Management agencies have been in a mode of what we call fire suppression. So stopping fires, putting them out, especially near residential areas, and protecting human life and property, which I agree with. That's a good thing to do, but it's caused an unnatural amount of vegetation and fuel buildup in the forest. And what I think is so important to this conversation about fire suppression and whether they should burn or not is the geography. And so, as a professor of geography, place really matters. So when you talk about it, I always like to think about it on an elevational gradient. So from low elevation to high elevation, I have different answers. In low elevation, where most of our cities are in the west, Salt Lake Valley is down in the valley bottom. we've had tremendous impacts because fires there tend to have occurred naturally quite frequently, like every 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and we've slowed that process down. Now, up at the top of the mountains in the highest elevation, fires occur there naturally every 100, 200, 300 years. So it's much less frequent. So we haven't really affected the amount of fuel or vegetation in those high elevations. So as you go across, in Utah, this is the reality of our geography. We have these steep elevational changes. So we have changed the fuel loads in these low and middle elevations. And so I would say, yes, let it burn if it's down low in mid elevation. But as we move to high elevation, we shouldn't expect fires in those high elevation forests, but once a century or once every couple centuries. So that's where we need to be paying attention about fire suppression and whether or not, we should allow fires to burn. Now, it is a big topic, and so I'll try not to carry on too long, but there's some interesting changes in agency. So the Park Service, for example, they have a let it burn policy. Yellowstone, when fires start in Yellowstone, in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, they let them burn. They let them burn out and kind of go naturally. It kind of depends on the agency. The Forest Service has different kind of regional opinions on it. The conditions we've seen this year with the extreme fire behavior, so we're getting really big fires, really hot fires, high intensity, we call that, and they're spreading very rapidly from high wind events. Those are concerned because it kind of destroys this idea I just presented, which is low elevation and high elevation, because you can, with those fire ripe conditions, you can burn from low to high elevation in one fire. So we've created a complicated mess for us to just say let it burn or put it out. It's really complicated, and so we have to think about other species. We have endangered species. We have mammals that are restricted to small habitats. We use this word endemic, so they only occur in certain areas. So you have to make all of these considerations now around fires. Is if a fire burns to an area where, let's say it's pika habitat, up at the tops of the mountains, it could be devastating to a small population of pika, for example. So it's a good question, and it's why I'm giving you a long answer, because it's a hard one to answer. But what we have to do is catch up. So I think most fire ecologists would agree we're in a fire deficit. So we've taken fire out for too long. We need to catch up. And we can do that by trying to add fire carefully, or we can do it by trying to remove firewood. So fuel, mulching, trying to decompose, accelerate the decomposition. So there's some ideas out there on how to get beyond this problem.
Okay, we have a very specific question from Tib in Moab. He is curious if you've seen a shift back to a spruce fir ecosystem after the shift in fire frequency you saw 6,000 years ago declined again.
Interesting. So he's paying close attention. So we have not seen a strong shift back towards spruce at a large scale. But what we do see is in some smaller drainages where you have the right conditions, you can promote spruce at the expense of other trees. So the way we measure these changes is through pollen that accumulates in the soils. It accumulates in lakes. And so when we go and collect these records, we have what we call stratigraphy. So it's like a column of sediment, and we sample for pollen. And what we're getting is the airborne pollen. So this is blowing around in the wind, makes a lot of us sneeze and suffer from seasonal allergies. It causes that yellow layer on lakes in the summertime. And so we're getting an average of the kind of pollen produced by trees. So it gets hard for us to say small scale shifts are happening, because what you're looking at is, some spruce pollen may be blowing in and some pine pollen may be blowing in. but you don't know exactly where it's coming from and what proportion of the forest is spruce and pine. We can use lots of records that are nearby in a region, which is what we're doing in the Uintas, to try to understand, can we get small changes in spruce? And so spruce is, as I said in the recording earlier, and as the question kind of highlights, spruce is sensitive to fire. So if there's more fire, we should expect less spruce. Spruce also loves winter snowpack. It's a real big fan of lots of snow in the winter, and it can soak up that soil moisture in the spring and summer. And so if we have good snow, spruce can do really well. So, you start to tease out what are the conditions that support spruce over pine. But I think it's pretty strong, the evidence, that we saw in the Uintas about 6,000 years ago, that pine came in. It didn't totally wipe out spruce, but it made spruce retreat to smaller pockets in the Uintas. And it's this kind of pendulum swinging that has been happening for thousands of years, where spruce may expand and then contract and then expand and contract. But fire, as Paul Michael has kind of zoomed in on here, fire is a key ecosystem process. It is the one that will determine the fate of a lot of species, whether you can tolerate it or not. And if you can tolerate it, like lodgepole, you'll be a winner. If you can't, like spruce, you may have to hide in a drainage where fire doesn't want to go into.
So let's talk about fire ecology. So in addition to being a botanist and a geographer, you are also a fire ecologist. Like, what does that mean, fire ecology?
So, I like to think of ecology is you're trying to trace the flow of a system. Like, what makes a system work? Like, what are the elements that contribute to any system? Whether you're driving your car through an automated car wash, and there's soap coming out and scrubbers and things wiping your windshield. All of those elements make up that system. And a forest is the same. A forest has what we break into two components. It has the biological components and the non-biological, so biotic and abiotic. And so we're interested in all these pieces. So, the non-biological pieces, the minerals in the soil, the nutrients, the aspect of the slope, the angle of the slope, whether it's a north facing or south facing, what's the history of the geology? Has there been ice ages through there? Has there been lava flows? That's all the non-biological part. And then there's the biological part, which is, what species interact in a system. So, take a lodgepole pine system, there's mistletoe on the trees. There's lots of mammals that love the understory of lodgepole. Elk and deer will use those habitats. Bear like the thick cover in lodgepole. So there's all these species that have interactions in the system. So ecology is trying to make sense of these biological and non-biological factors. And you can't do it all, but you want to understand the process that drives the system. And so I've really focused on fire as that process. It's a process that is really, it's fundamental to many systems because it can reset a system. So when a forest fire comes and if it burns the forest down, you effectively have a clean slate. You have maybe some charred mineral soil. You hopefully have a seed bank in the soil from the plants that were there before. And then it's kind of a race for light, moisture, and nutrients. It's who can grab all that light, take the nutrients out of the soil and grow the fastest. And that process of, these species competing, changing the habitat, that's the ecology that's so neat for me to study and try to understand. And the best way that I find to study ecology is to go into places that are at different stages of recovery. So I love to visit old growth forests where there hasn't been a disturbance for hundreds of years. I love to walk across a charred landscape, and then I love everything in between. And each time I visit these landscapes, I learn something because there's different processes that happen at different stages. and they reveal, how complicated, this drive-through car wash really is. There's a lot of working pieces, and our job as scientists and ecologists is try to make sense of many of those pieces as we can.
So I know that that you're not only interested in examining fires that are happening now, but you're also interested in fires in the past. Why is that?
Yeah, so a lot of my research while I was in graduate school, I was studying changes in plant communities in Western Montana, and I was trying to understand why one community would come in and replace another community. And my advisor at the time suggested I start to look into fire to understand these processes. And so understanding the way that fire can drive this mechanism and push species around the landscape. Now you go back in time because there's lessons from the past. And to me, it's the lessons, I think, that are so important for us to understand today. So, just an example, some of you might have heard of this time period called the medieval climate. And so the medieval climate, was about, from 800 AD to 1200 AD, about 400 years. And this 400 years, it was warm. This was the time when the Norse moved to Greenland, and climates around the world were slightly warmer. So we can look at that time and say, okay, in a warmer climate, what kind of processes are driving forests and ecosystems? And of course, what we discovered is there was a lot of fire. There was fires all over the world. And so we did a global study on this in particular. And we did find that this medieval climate period had, not coherent in time per se. So it wasn't every place in the world was burning all at once, but over that 400 years, there was a lot more fire happening across the planet. And so, as we go back and we look at warm periods, we look at cold periods, we see not exactly the opposite, but we see a lot less fire. So we can use the past as a way to understand, okay, if you turn up temperature, what's the response? If you make it really cold, what's the response? Which species tend to do well, which species do not? Or if you have big disturbances, we can look at volcanic eruptions and massive earthquake events, and we can try to see if there's a legacy that we see on the landscape today from these past events. And that's really, in a nutshell, that's what I love about kind of digging into the past, beyond my own curiosity of trying to understand and tell the story. It's when I look at a mountain today, or I look at a forest, how much of that forest is a result of thousands of years of events and processes that have unfolded that have really contributed to what we have today. So that's a big part of using that long-term perspective to understand what we have and where we're headed. So that's a good question.
All right, I got another great question for you here. Glenna from Facebook was wondering if your data takes into account man-made fires, especially when considering fires that started by indigenous peoples going back thousands of years.
Yeah, good question, Glenna. So we've been trying to explore this more, and it's tricky because prehistoric people didn't have Bic lighters, right? So when we do our research and we're looking through old soils and we're looking for fossils of plants and we're looking for signatures that might indicate there was more fire or less fire, we don't always have a perfect representation of what people were doing. And so there's been several different ideas lately of how to do this. And in fact, I mentioned Pando earlier. So some of our research around Pando, we've discovered working with archaeologists that there was a lot of human activity up around Fish Lake. And what we found is that this kind of elevated amount of fire seemed higher than what we expected naturally. And when we see more fire in a landscape than we expect naturally based on our understanding of climate and fire, we have to start to look at the archaeological record and understand, well, what was the subsistence pattern? How did people live? What did they need fire? Did they use fire? And would fire have been a common tool? And in a lot of places in the West, it certainly was a very good tool for many reasons. So we're exploring this more. We've just submitted a paper actually about the Fish Lake study that we hope will come out soon, which talks about indigenous fire, and that we think that there are areas where indigenous fire really did shape the landscape. Now, what I'm always cautious about is scale. And so when you think about prehistoric people and their effect on a landscape, you have to think, well, how big of an effect could people have? Could they potentially change the forests of the Wasatch Mountains? Probably not. Could they change the plant species growing around Utah Lake? Absolutely. And so they could manage, small scale systems with fire. And the other piece I try to think about beyond scale is that I really believe, tribal people were fire experts. Like we can't even imagine how well they understood fire. Like they knew the time of year, the place to use it, when to use it, how to use it, how much area would be burnt if they lit it here because the wind was coming down a canyon in a certain way. I mean, they were really, pyromaniac experts. And I think I can't underestimate that. And that, it wasn't, this ubiquitous use of fire and kind of a scorched earth policy. It was very intentional and strategic, and it produced the things they needed for their subsistence. So, Glenn, it's a good question, and we're trying to figure it out as best we can. And what it really involves is listening more to archaeologists and looking at the records archaeologists have and trying to understand how people lived and how fire might have benefited them. Because once you can establish a benefit, like maybe it's for game drives, or maybe it's a plant that wants to grow more after fire, and that was a main resource. Once you find the benefits, it's easier for us to then think about areas of fire and time periods of fire when the climate wasn't right to really drive fire up, but we see more fire, we can start pointing towards humans. So, but this gets challenging to work on, and that's why it's so much fun.
Salt Lake City resident Katrina was wondering if we are seeing plant communities change in Utah due to climate change.
Yes. So part of the work that I've been doing in the collection at the museum is studying the phenology. So phenology is the seasonal timing of events, and can be anything from the time a flower first comes out to when a plant decides to create fruit and drop its fruit, or to when animals migrate. That's phenology. It's just seasonal timing. So in the collection in the herbarium, we have 150 years of plant collections where it's capturing a date and a plant that has a flower on it. So we've been looking at those flowering times and then going back to the same location to try to see, is it changing? Are flowering times happening earlier in the spring, for example? And the difficult part is when you work with a collection, you have, maybe you have 10 or maybe you have 100 plants that all suggest a flowering window from April 1st to May 15th. So you have this 6 weeks of potential flowering. Now, do you have a representation of all of the plants flowering in that window, or are you only capturing one end or the other end? It's hard to know. So what we've done is we've picked plants that have a very narrow flower time. So something like 2 weeks, they tend to come up and they flower. We use those from the collection. We go out in the field and we try to find those in those couple of weeks. Now, the preliminary evidence is yes, we're seeing something like 2 weeks earlier flowering time for many species. So there is a shift. We're seeing that spring temperature tends to be correlated with a earlier flowering time. Now, this work is ongoing, and we'll continue to look by using data from other herbaria. So we work with our colleagues at Utah State and BYU, and across the Intermountain West. And so the jury's still out, but the preliminary evidence suggests that species in Utah are shifting towards earlier flowering. And I think this is standing up to anecdotal evidence. Many of my friends in botany, they'll send me emails and messages. February, hey, there's this flower I saw coming off the hill slope in February. And so all of that is starting to contribute to this body of knowledge that, yeah, plants in Utah are starting to flower earlier. And there's even some evidence that tree line, which is the upper edge of our forest in the mountains, may be creeping upslope. So the next time you go hiking in the Wasatch or the Uintas and you hit tree line and the trees start to taper off, look for juvenile plants. Because if you see young plants growing above the edge of the top of the trees, you can start to realize that, yeah, plants they're moving upslope and they're flowering earlier. They're adjusting to climate.
Now, I'm curious about kind of looking way back in time, when we're starting even before humans. You have a lot of tricks up your sleeve and to determine when fires occurred, what plants were on Earth. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of evidence that you collect and use to reconstruct the past?
Yeah. So the way that we approach kind of the science is we try to get as much evidence as we can to answer a particular question. And so when we go way back in time, we're primarily dealing with fragmentary evidence, right? And this is true for any kind of natural history discipline that looks back in time. You're looking at fragmentary evidence. So when I say fragmentary, I'm talking about, fossil pollen grains. And, just so some of your viewers get a sense, I don't have any pollen grains to show you except for, what's in my book here. So these like little Mickey Mouse ears, these things are, about 100 microns. So you can't actually see them with your naked eye. Those are pine pollen grains, but it's the yellow dust, right? So we're effectively looking for yellow dust buried in dirt that's thousands of years old. Okay, so we have this, challenge of like, well, how do we piece these stories together? So we also look for, burnt pieces of plants, so needles, leaves, twigs, stems, whatever kind of burnt fragments we can find. And when we're lucky and we get large burnt fragments, we can try to identify, so that looks like a spruce needle. Let's compare that burnt piece to a spruce needle. So we get this kind of skeleton plot of what we think is happening. And the most important thing in the research we do about these fossil fragments is, okay, say you come up with a story. Can you reproduce that story? Can you go to another site that's just down the road, and will it tell you the same, the same story? And that's the critical piece for the science we do is, even though we work with fragments, if we can replicate our science through the same methods and the same research approach, and that shows the same kind of trend that, like in the case of the Uintas, that, we see these massive fires 6,000 years ago, and lodgepole pine tends to come in at the expense of spruce. Well, we see that across several localities. So that's part of the challenge. Now, the one thing I haven't really talked about tonight is how do we know the ages of stuff, right? Like when we go back thousands of years, how do you know it's thousands of years? So there's a few tricks, as you say, tricks. Tricks is kind of a dirty word in science. It can get scientists in a lot of trouble because we're not really trying to do tricks. We're trying to have clever approaches to generate evidence that we can then replicate, right?
Let's call them techniques.
Yes, thank you. So, chronology, as we call it, the timeline is the most important aspect of our work. So most often we use radiocarbon dating. So when we radiocarbon date, we're taking a plant that's been in the ground for a certain amount of time, and we're measuring the amount of carbon. We know there's a known decay rate of carbon in plants. It has a half-life of about 5,500 years. And there's been lots of work done to kind of explain how carbon disintegrates through time. So we can use these radiocarbon dating approaches to give us a point in time where we have plant material to date. The other kind of nifty technique we like to use is when we have ashes from volcanoes. We call them tephras. So if you have a tephra, most ashes are unique to the volcano they come from. In fact, I think all ashes, they're diagnostic. So it's like fingerprinting. You can fingerprint an ash to the exact volcano it came to with modern techniques. And in fact, we have a colleague in geology here at the University of Utah, Barb Nash, and that's exactly what Barbara does is she looks at ashes and says exactly where they came from, and then once you know where it came from, what the ash is, you know the date of the eruption from lots of folks studying it. So we use ash layers as time checks as well. So we get ash layers, we get radiocarbon dates, and we build this idea of time and an accumulation of soil and accumulation of dirt through time. And that helps us start to understand, what we're looking at and how long processes take. So the really deep time work, it has lots of challenges, but like I said, the most important thing is, based on the fragmentary pieces of evidence, we want to tell a story. And once we get that story established, can we reproduce it? Can we replicate a story in a similar place? And then, what's kind of happened, which is exciting to me in my career, is now we're sampling at finer and finer intervals. So before we might look at changes every 50 years. Does that spruce forest stay there for the next 50 years and the next 50 years and the next 50 years? And now we're looking at, millimeter changes. So we're interested, does the spruce forest stay there because of really great winters and the snowpack? Or, is there a single drought event that hits the spruce forest and it dies back? Can we see the ecology, the fine scale in these really ancient records? And that's really exciting because we're trying to merge, what we call paleoecology, so ecology of the past, which is more fragmentary in its larger time steps, with ecology of today, which is, basically modern ecologists study systems, through summer, 2 or 3 summers of field work. So we want to merge like what we know today and how systems work with what we see in the past. And one way to get there is by understanding the past at finer time steps. So that's really exciting work, Paul Michael, and that's one of my latest kind of adventures is this like super duper high resolution sampling. And many of my friends think I'm crazy for doing millimeter sampling, but I think it's exciting because we're getting real time like plant succession. Big fire, who comes in first, who comes in second, who comes in next, and that's really exciting.
Okay, we got a lot of questions about the work that you do internationally. I know that you work in Colombia, in South America, and Ethiopia in Africa. And let's see here. We have John in Salt Lake wants to know if you've studied plants outside of Utah. Susan on YouTube is hoping you could share some recent international adventures in the tropics. And Mary Jane from the Avenues was wondering, what are some of the coolest projects your students are working on right now? So can you tell us briefly about some work that you're up to right now internationally?
Yeah. So let me start with Ethiopia. Ethiopia, so I first started in about 2007, putting together some research in Ethiopia. And since I've done 3 field campaigns, and I've been working in the Tigray region. And unfortunately, the Tigray region, which is on the border of Eritrea, has been in the news these past few weeks because there's been an increase in violence. And so we have some concern with many of our colleagues that are living and working in the region, and we don't have communications right now. So we hope this will kind of end quickly. But the project there is fascinating. And so I was asked to join this team, very large team of researchers based out of Simon Fraser University in Canada, led by Kathy DeAndre. And Kathy had been working for about 25 years in the region as an archaeologist, and she has been studying the Aksumite and pre-Aksumite people. So this is a large cultural complex, about 3,000 years old, and they disappeared. They kind of, it's one of these, mysteries of large complex civilization, and they kind of completely collapse and disappear. And so she invited a team of paleoecologists like myself to come and try to help her solve what happened. So I've been out there several times now. In fact, let me show you one of my specimens. This was kind of exciting to me. Let's see if I can hold this one up. So most of your viewers, so this is a typical herbarium sheet, but this is a juniper. So you might recognize this juniper. Looks like a juniper from Utah. There's the label right there. It's Juniperus procera. So it's actually a native juniper to Central Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And so it's their only native juniper. So when I landed in Ethiopia the first time, I looked around, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I took a flight to southern Utah because it looked exactly like southern Utah. It was red sandstone and juniper. And it was just the craziest thing. And then you realize, most of the houses don't have electricity. They live on dirt floors. They're built out of local stone materials. And so in this project, we've been studying sediment records. We're looking for plant fossils. We're looking for what is the evidence for the collapse of the Aksumites, and why did they kind of disband as this really complicated civilization? I mean, they were one of the first to develop the coin. And in fact, what's interesting about the coin in the Aksumites is the coin wasn't for purchasing, it was for propaganda, because it had the king's head printed on the coin. And so if you had some coin, it meant you were part of the kingdom, right? Because of the propaganda. So what we're finding is that there looks to us like there was massive deforestation, so high population growth, massive deforestation. And of course, there was lots of fire. There's a lot of fire signal. Looks like there was probably some soil degradation that happened, and there was probably a climate change. Now, what we don't know is, were there diseases? Was there conflict and warfare? Were there other things going on contributing? Probably. So this is ongoing, and the jury's out. We're trying to solve this mystery, why the Aksumites kind of packed up and disappeared. And so, it's a project that will go on for many, many years. But I'll be happy when we can get some papers out and at least make some preliminary conclusions. So that's a neat project, and it's really working in tandem with a huge team of international folks from France and Canada and the U.S. And many local Ethiopians. And I think that's important. Whenever I do international work, is you involve the locals, get them excited about the work, because they own it, like it's their heritage, and they are so excited to be involved. Colombia, it's a little different story there. We're really interested in biological diversity, and we're working in the lowlands to the highlands. So I talked about elevational gradient. So we're in along the Magdalena River Valley, which gets me very excited because I'm a big fan of von Humboldt. Von Humboldt was this incredible explorer, and he traveled up the Magdalena River Valley and went into this very same region and made lots of new discoveries. And so I get to go work in an area where he has been and try to understand the processes like disturbance, like fire, and whether or not, we call it the Goldilocks idea. So whether or not there's been enough fire or not enough fire, or just the right amount of fire to create diversity. So we're really interested in, in this idea, can you have just the perfect amount of disturbance and then have higher diversity? So when I say diversity, mean, numbers of different species of plants on the landscape. So I have a graduate student from Columbia, Susanna, and she's amazing to work with. She's full of great ideas. And she and I have been to Columbia just before the pandemic. We went in January. We did a field trip, and just briefly on that trip. So imagine this: you fly in with 600-700 pounds of gear. You land in the Bogota airport at midnight. Some guy you've never met before picks you up, drives you to his home where you're staying the night before you drive 8 to 10 hours north into the jungle, which I have no idea where I'm really going, but Susie knows where we're going. And so we get all the gear together, we load up the truck, it's very classic, field work picture where the truck is overloaded on the top and it looks like it's going to have flat tires because we have so much weight. But anyways, we do the 8 to 10 hour drive and eat our way along the route, which was, my favorite thing to do when doing field work is, enjoy the cuisines. And we get to this site at about midnight the next night. So we're driving in the dark through the jungle in a 4-wheel drive, crossing rivers. And I'm just thinking, am I ever going to see my family again? The gringo who knows nothing. So we wake up in the morning to this lake. We have these fantastic accommodations right on the lake, and this lake is probably one of the most beautiful scenes I've experienced in the tropics. It's like the tropical birds are singing, the frogs are croaking, the chorus of insects, of hundreds of thousands of insects singing. I mean, it was just incredible. And we went out and we were able to go to this very deep part of the lake, almost 200 feet deep, and extract a record from this lake. So we're now in the process of studying the evidence from this record, so the fossil plant material. So anyway, so that trip, you have moments when you do field work where you're scared to death because you don't know anything about the area you're going into. And then what I discover is once you connect with people, you have made friends for life. And these people, Ethiopians and the Colombians I've worked with, they literally will give you the shirt off their back. They will break their last loaf of bread for you, and they will make you an incredible cup of coffee. Of course, there's no coincidence that I happen to work in two of the best coffee producing regions in the world, Ethiopia and Colombia. And so it's, I think that again, I said this earlier about working with the people at the museum. It's the same in field work. You meet these people and you explain to them what you're trying to understand, and they're all in. They want to help you. They want to make sure you get out on that lake. They'll find a boat for you. They'll find, you need extra pieces of equipment, cable, whatever. They will find it and make it happen. So it's, that's probably the favorite part of my job is meeting these spectacular people who just want to, be part of the work that we do.
Well, that sounds like quite an adventure. Mitch, thank you so much for your time tonight. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. Be sure to join us tomorrow night at 7 p.m. as Ty and Jason take us into the entomology collections. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the behind the scenes reimagined web pages. There you'll find photo galleries and videos and stories and 3D models, all showcasing the scientists, collections, and research that goes on behind the scenes at the Natural History Museum of Utah. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow. And remember, stay curious.